We're live at the Boardroom. I have a guest favorite today, a guy that I've admired for a very long time. And Woj, it, it's first off, it's an honor to have you on the show.
Great to be
Secondly,
here, Jay.
and I know at ESPN that a lot of times the way people like to label you as an NBA insider, but you wear so many hats. If you had a chance to tell the world what your identity is or what your role is within the business, how would you explain it?
Well, ultimately it's reporter, right? They call it, was it senior NBA insider? We have all these titles. At the end of the day, it's reporter. And that's the most important role title. I think the minute for me and what I do, that I lose sight of I'm not a TV analyst, a talking head. We're on countdown, and Jay, we usually talk a lot about how I want to deliver information on the show. You tend to not get a lot of opinion from me. I want it to always be reporting based when we do a show, when we do countdown on, if it's Friday night or it's a Sunday afternoon. I want to have something new. I want to have something that I'm reporting that hasn't necessarily been reported before, or you're able to move the ball down the field 10 yards or 15 yards. Some nugget of information that advances a story. So that to me is my mindset every day. And I think the minute, for me anyway, that you try to get out of those lanes is when you're going to be in trouble. My value is as a reporter, and I think for me, that pulls you in a lot of directions at ESPN, but ultimately it's got to be the essence of everything you're doing, and it's got to be the foundation of everything.
But was just give me a little bit of a tutorial here because when we're on air, I don't think people at home know all this. Obviously, all the cameras that are in that building, in that room, understanding what camera you're talking to, having your producer, talk to you in your IFB on top of maintaining the conversation that's happening in front of you in real time with myself, Jalen, Maria, Paul. But still, you break news sometimes in the middle of a streaming of a conversation. Like, how do you process all the different moving pieces while at once?
Yeah, it's there have been times. I think maybe the last show we did, Jay. I think the DeMarcus Cousins waiver with the Lakers. I had heard that they were going to waive DeMarcus, but I needed a source to involved in it to tell me that was the case. So before we went on air, I wrote up essentially a tweet, and then it's a line I send to our news desk that Cousins would be waived. And so when I got confirmation of that from a source that would allow me then to feel confident enough to go on air with it, all I had to do was I had hit copy and paste. I text it to myself, and then I can tweet it out without having to type it on air. So that's an example. You can get a little ahead of it if you are just waiting for a text message response while we're on air. But that's part of it. People want news in real time, and we've had plenty of instances. I think this season, just with the countdown show, where we've had news come within the hour of our show from 7 to 8 or later in the evening. Based on events.
Yeah, how do you, I guess information gets out so fast, Woj, so fast that sometimes the player himself or that person doesn't hear the news from the actual team. They actually hear it from you first, and that can leave a bad taste sometimes in players' mouths. Like, how do you balance that between GMs and presidents or your sources before you actually go out with the news?
It's a good question, Jay. And listen, sometimes there's an ability for players. I think it's harder in the multiplayer trades when there's a lot of players involved. I'll give you an example: the Lakers Pelicans trade for Anthony Davis. Lots of players involved. I can think of one last year before the trade deadline: Philadelphia and the Clippers for Tobias Harris. Lots of players involved. Typically teams would like to get that information to their players, and I think in many cases they do. But there's also, there's a period of time where you're in a competitive environment, and I think there's been times where you can allow for someone to find out and then report it. There's other times where you simply can't.
I gotta tell you, every time I'm around you, man, I get a little bit anxious, right? Because every time we talk, I hear your phone ring, and I'm like, is he missing something because of me and him and I having this conversation? Like, I've heard your phone ring about 3 or 4 times already,
Yeah.
and I'm wondering, is there breaking news that I need to know that you're probably going to report about? Like, how do you handle that all the time, Woj?
Well, you know what? I have like four text, like different text chains going. Two are with college friends, nothing to do with the business. One is actually a health update on a friend,
Mm.
and so, but yeah, it's in terms of this time of year right now. I mean, there's news and there's a lot of reporting going on, but it's not the way you might have during the season where it can be minute to minute or even hour to hour. It's, you know, there's conversations going on among the league and the Players Association, and but there's not like the continuum of, we don't have injuries right now. We don't have. I mean, listen, what are all the things that are going on even after a trade deadline that you might be reporting on in the course of a day? And those things are all by the wayside right now.
Yeah, it is very precarious and scary times around. How has your industry changed, or has it changed due to COVID-19? And you know, uh, where is the NBA right now? And I know there's a lot of moving parts. I know it's hard to kind of just put into one sphere, but how would you be able to kind of break that down for us?
I mean, right, just like I think everywhere else in society, just tremendous uncertainty. What in the short term, the toll this is taking on all of our communities. I mean, you live in the city, Jay. I live in northern New Jersey. These have been places hit really hard so far by the coronavirus, and we're all around hospitals that are overwhelmed and medical workers that are trying to do their jobs and literally risking their lives without the proper protection. And we still have health officials and government officials in these regions telling us we haven't hit the apex of this, that's coming here in coming weeks. And certainly those around the country and around the world are feeling the brunt of this at different times. And so that's a part of everybody's life. It's a part of the industry, certainly the NBA. Listen, there's a lot of people in the NBA who have a cushion to be able to withstand this. Owners, players, coaches, executives, many of us in the media who are fortunate to not necessarily be living on a week-to-week or a month-to-month basis. But it's going to impact every industry. And what it's all going to look like when we come through this, whenever that is, I think we all can agree. We may not agree on what it may look like, but I think we all can agree it's going to be different. And I think, and I've said this a few times to some different people I've talked to. I think I talked about it with Tim Connolly from Denver on the podcast the other day. I do hope the result around the NBA and not just the NBA, but other industries. Listen, it's easy to take all this for granted and think we're all entitled to, like, the money's going to keep growing and player contracts will even get bigger. General managers and presidents, they keep outdoing each other on contracts. Coaches are always comparing each other's contracts. Who got this?
Mm-hmm.
I want to get that. We do it in our business. We're just as guilty of it. And so I think, I hope it's a reboot for everybody, that none of us are entitled to any of this. We're all fortunate to get to do it. And you know what? There's plenty to go around. You don't have to have it all. And we look around the world we live in right now, and there's plenty of people who need help, who are, whether it's people who are suffering from the virus, their families, small businesses. There's going to be a lot of people coming out of this that are going to need a great deal of help. And I think certainly it's all of our responsibilities, just as our civic responsibilities, to do all we can. And I hope the NBA and my business and those around the league, and I think people do feel that way, can be a part of helping.
Yeah, last time I checked, I think I saw on the news that the unemployment rate was reaching around 3.5 million, which is pretty insane for our country, the highest it's ever been. And with that being said, though, I commend Adam Silver, Woj. I mean, first off, he was the first professional sports league to kind of pull out and suspend the season with everything going on. And then, there was a lot of, I guess, conflation with what individual franchises were doing. We saw this with the ownership group that owns the 76ers and the New Jersey Devils. They said they were going to cut slash salaries of employees that made over 50,000 by 20%. But then you had Joel Embiid that came out and said he was going to pledge $500,000 to all the employees that were going to have their salaries cut. And then Scott O'Neill, who's a good friend, the president, then he reneged his statement, kind of wound that back. And then Adam Silver came in and said that all executives in the NBA were going to cut their salaries to some extent. How have you thought the NBA has handled this as a whole thus far?
Well, I think that from Adam Silver's part of it, the league office, right? The league, people who work for the league. So people who work in Olympic Tower in Manhattan, who work in the NBA headquarters, that's a majority. The NBA's essentially top 100 earning executives. And that's not including the team side. That's just including, Adam Silver, Mark Tatum, the deputy commissioner, the heads of departments and managers and officials in the league office in New York, and then around the world. There's certainly other headquarters and all over the globe, and there are some of those included in that. But team officials have not yet taken. You haven't seen that yet with organizations. Philadelphia came the closest, like you said, Jay. They pulled back on it. I think a lot of this, so many organizations are built so differently. And, Mark Cuban came out initially and talked about, I'm going to take care of my employees, which was awesome. And it's great he's doing it. He's got fewer in Dallas. It's just, he doesn't own the arena. He doesn't own the hockey team. He's got the Mavericks. And he certainly was taking care of them. But there's other organizations where, Philly's an example, others who own, two teams in their market, perhaps. They own the major league team, minor league teams. I think in Utah, they own a bunch of theaters. There's a bigger group of employees. And so it's more complicated for others. The Knicks in New York, they own the building. They own the team. So I think different organizations have had to go about it a little differently because it was more complex. It feels as though many have stepped up. I haven't been counting them. Some people have, but it's clear that many have taken the responsibility seriously. And I think we'll see what happens with the planet. I know we'll get into this, but we'll see what happens with the players and if the league decides to cut into player salaries at all, because that will take care of everybody. All you got to do is cut into one player's 15% left on his season, never mind your whole roster. And you're going to be able to pay all these guys for 100 years, all your other employees, because the player salaries are so high. And so it would be interesting to me to see if they do take any money from players, if there's any organization that would double dip and also do it with their other employees. My sense is they wouldn't, because they're going to get all the revenue back they could imagine by enforcing that force majeure clause in the collective bargaining agreement, or some part of it, getting some level of money back from players based on games that may be canceled, regular season games that may be canceled between now and the end of the season.
So, Woj, force majeure is the clause in the CBA that stipulates in case of any natural disaster, something that is a catastrophe happening, the NBA essentially could suspend paying the players. And is that money kept in escrow and used at their, at their lenience when they choose?
Yeah, there's no mechanism unless they negotiate it to give the players the money back. And I think that's one of the questions of the Players Association, where, okay, let's say you do that, and it's within the owner's rights to do it. It's in players' contracts. It's in many people's contracts in a lot of different walks of life. In our business, people have that in their contract. You rarely, if ever, see it enacted because of the circumstances like war, earthquake, natural disaster, epidemic, pandemic. These are things that aren't common, and that's why it's put in there as almost like a doomsday provision in these deals. But I think players, the league needs the players to come back from this. They need the players. They've got to negotiate a lot of things with the Players Association. Let's say they come back and play this season. And what are the circumstances around that? How many weeks of training camp are there? How many regular season games would be left? Where would the games be played? Would they be played all in one site under quarantine? would we play into September? What kind of a off season, a gap would you have from, let's say the season ends Labor Day weekend, hypothetically, and when would you start up again? They have to negotiate all these things with the players. Lots of dates on their contracts for free agency, like options. They're all things that they've got to work out. And more importantly, listen, when the players come back, and if you've taken part of their salary, you're looking at the motivation to be as cooperative as they're going to need guys to be to come back and play under really unique circumstances. So I think Adam Silver, I certainly know Adam Silver is very sensitive to that and understands this isn't just, we're not just going to put the hammer down and this is it, sorry, no conversation. There might be owners who feel that way, but I don't think a majority of them, because at the end of the day, Jay, this is still a players' league. And while the owners might have the leverage to enforce that now, I think it's a fair question from the players to go, okay, if we give back now, like when this thing gets ramped up again and the NBA's back to printing money like they've been for the last number of years, is there any mechanism to make good on that? And that might be other things moving forward. So there's a lot to talk about between the players and the league office about how they'll go forward with this.
I wanted to ask you a question because I've looked at the CBA a multitude of times, and in this CBA, is there still, because I think in the last CBA, owners were taking 10% of players' salaries and leaving that in escrow. Is that
escrow? And that's still accurate.
That's still accurate. So what happens with that buffer of money that's already been accrued, that's been sitting in escrow? Could that be utilized to help or reallocate it to help with some of these issues happening?
Absolutely. And, the escrow's there based on how, when you get to the end of the season, there's projections of the salary cap and you sign, let's say you sign a deal for $15 million and your numbers based on the salary cap, the per year income. And so the league keeps that 10%. I think they take it over the first 6 months of the year of your paycheck. And then like, this is a year, listen, we know what's going to happen. They're going to have a shortfall at the end this year. Like the revenue is going to be down because of this, because of, they knew it would be down a little bit because of China and what happened with the fracture in the relationship there earlier. And so then that is money that, doesn't go back to the players. The BRI is essentially basketball related income. It's like a 51-49, almost 50-50 partnership based on revenue. And so it impacts next year's salary cap. It impacts, a great deal. And so I think there's a feeling among players, the Players Association and agents is, hey, you've already got this money in escrow. It's going to be there. And we'll see. And again, you can't take that money back from the players until you cancel games. The force majeure is based on the canceling of games, whether it's 1 game, 5 games, 10 regular season games. You've got to be ready to cancel games when you do that. And so here we are in late March when you and I are taping this. The league doesn't know how many regular season games they're going to play, if at all, this year before they get to the playoffs. They don't know if they're going to get to the playoffs. In a perfect world, they would make up all these games. That doesn't seem realistic right now based on the timetables. But how many regular season games could you get to before the playoffs? And for teams, listen, a great deal of their revenue, it isn't, I think for the small market teams, the gate revenue is certainly important, but the television revenue is where, where most of the league really, especially the national television revenue. And that's why they want to get to the playoffs. They want to get that revenue. And that's important for the players too, because again, they all share in that money. There's a partnership between owners and players.
So that's why I think it's so interesting about the operative word semantics, right? The terminology cancel was never used. It was, we're suspending the season. If the season does have to be canceled, that TV revenue, is that then kept by all the networks? Are those contracts, are there stipulations in those contracts? I would assume so, in case like a natural catastrophe or something like this would occur, where the networks would not have to pay the leagues for the rights if those games did not occur.
That's right. And because these are long-term partnerships, Jay, it's almost like the comparison that was given to me by one team president. If you were a team and you cancel games, the people who had like a single ticket for one game, they wanted to go to the Sacramento Pacer game and they bought tickets for that one game, well, they want a refund. But the people who have season tickets, who have perhaps own suites or rent suites, there can be a make good down the line. They can do some things for you in the future to financially, it's something of a partnership. And I think that's how it is with the television deals, whether it's the regional deals where 70 games is kind of a magic number for the league to get get the full complement of the regional television money. And then, with the playoffs on, Turner, on obviously ABC, ESPN, that's obviously a bigger pot of money, but these groups are all in it for the long term. So there's ways to certainly negotiate and try to find ways to make good on it in the future, with the expectation that next season and future seasons aren't going to be impacted by what's happened right now.
Well, let's take your reporter hat off. I want to see the unfiltered roads that we watch games together. No, I'm joking. I'm not going to ask you to go there. But you are a fan of the game. Like, I see you watch games the same way I do. Is it realistic to think that we will see the NBA be the same as it relates to fan attendance at those numbers realistically in the future?
I mean, Jay, if we are headed into a recession, if we are headed into really difficult economic times in the country, it only reasons to follow that the league's going to feel that, whether it's in attendance, whether it's in merchandise, whether it's in sponsorships, and television is going to feel it in advertising, because it's all connected. And I think certainly, I don't know that the NBA I don't know that any pro sport is just completely immune from that. As much as people love to watch the games and go to the games, and there's going to be different priorities financially for people. So I think the NBA is certainly going to feel, based on the economy and what's around it. And what will be interesting to me, Jay, is if the NBA does get back this season, I think there's a hope that people will be so starved for anything, for content, to see playoff games, even if they're in an empty arena, even if teams are playing at a single site in a casino ballroom somewhere, that people will be into it. But I do wonder about I think the diehards, the junkies, guys like you and me, and probably people who are watching this are going to watch regardless. But when you get into the playoffs, Jay, the value of the bigger audience in the playoffs comes from a more casual fan. And I do wonder how an environment where there's no fans, where there's no reaction, LeBron James makes an incredible play and there's just silence, and you don't have the reaction of the crowd shots and the player reacting to the emotion of the arena. I do wonder, after the novelty of the game being back a game or two or three or four nights, if the casual fan who's kind of brought in, just like people watch March Madness, I don't know that people care about the quality of play in college basketball, but they love the environment around it and they're into it. And if you take crowds out of that, I do wonder if in this year you'd be able to really bring in, that fan who doesn't necessarily pay attention as much until the postseason anyway.
Well, if you're LaMelo Ball, if you're Anthony Edwards, if you're Obi Toppin, when are you going to get drafted? Like, what is the latest on the NBA draft? Is that still look to be June? Is it going to be like what football is trying to do as it relates to phone calls? Is it going to be in September? What's the latest you're hearing on that?
Jay, I think everybody in the league feels it's almost impossible to have a draft if you still have a season that's ongoing. It's set for June 25th right now. And my sense is the only way it could happen on June 25th is if at that point the league's decided we can't play, the season's canceled, which I don't know what the world's going to look like in June. Neither do they. But if the season's going to go on and they're going to start play at some point, and they're going to have started by June 25th to be able to finish this thing, you can't have a draft while teams are still playing, even if there's 4 teams left in the playoffs or 8 teams left or 2 teams, because you can't do trades, right? You can't have some teams able to do trades because their season's done, and then some teams unable to do trades or agree to trades because they're still playing. And so the sense is that at some point you have to push the draft back behind the end of the finals, whenever that would be, and then free agency. Then there's been a movement in the league, Jay, in the last few years about trying to move free agency before the draft, the way the NFL does it. And I don't know that that's what comes out of this. I think they would be kind of bang bang at the end of the season. But if you're not going to have a summer league, if you don't have an environment where you can bring the players in to start working with them, then I think it's easier to move the draft back. Everyone's going to have to just wait, and maybe there's some sort of a summer league, or it becomes a fall league after the NBA season ends, if it resumes, and then it's all pushed back, and then guys go from that summer league to a quicker return to training camp. But right now, the things that you're used to with pre-draft, players go to LA, they sign with an agent, and then the agent starts having a trainer with them, and they pay their living expenses, and they all go work out. Many of them, the big agencies, a lot of the players will work out together with a specific trainer in LA, or some of them in Miami or in New York. None of that is happening right now. And so, again, everything's on hold, and, teams can't bring in players like they normally would for workouts, for interviews. You're probably not going to have a combine. The only thing I could really see is, let's say you're Golden State and you get the first overall pick. You're Cleveland, you have the second overall pick. However it shakes out, maybe you use a private plane to fly in one or two of the guys to get a sense of them. But you're not going to be using private planes just to fly in random guys. It's too expensive. We know teams are going to be looking to cut back. And so I think there'll be very limited travel, except maybe among the elite couple picks in the draft, especially in a draft where there's no clear-cut number one. There's no clear-cut number two. It's going to go perhaps by preference, need. And I don't think, if you took 5 teams who might be at the top of the lottery, I bet you all 5 of their draft boards would look very different right now.
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to ask you, because I forgot to ask you before. Hypothetically, if you were a player who was hurt throughout most of the year, and now you've been given a lot more time to get healthy. I'm not saying this could happen, but just hypothetically, if Kevin Durant decided to come back and play when the playoffs did occur for the Brooklyn Nets, would that be allowed by the league?
Yeah, Kevin Durant is on the Nets roster, and he could be activated. The regular season would resume, or even if the playoffs resumed, if he or Kyrie Irving was healthy enough, wow, they could come back. Ben Simmons has been able to get some time here with that back injury he's had. We'll see what it looks like for him if it resumes. So there's nothing prohibiting that. It's not like I guess maybe like a college redshirt year. I guess you could burn a redshirt year whenever you want, but it would be an interesting dynamic, to have guys who are injured coming back in. I think the Nets are the only real one where it could be that dramatic of an impact. And then vice versa. It'll be interesting, Jay, if there's only going to be a few regular season games left. Let's say, teams have 15, 16, 17 games. Let's say they're only going to play a handful. Who's going to want their key players coming back to play in those? Like if you're Golden State, are you dying to put Steph Curry back out there with a quickie training camp and then just a few games left that don't mean anything when you're trying to have everybody healthy and return for next year? So what the rosters look like if we do have a return, you're going to have the playoff teams really gunning to get up, to be in shape, to be healthy, to get a chemistry back. And they could, and especially if they're potentially going into a best of 5 first round series, anything can happen. And you're going to have teams who are out of the playoff hunt. You wonder, what those lineups and rosters would look like if they're just playing out the string in a few games at the end of a season. Yeah,
depending upon how many games, it would be really interesting for the 8th seed in the West with Memphis and some of the other teams in by for that. I want to transition really quickly, Woj, on the last note to your podcast, which is incredible, by the way. The Woj podcast, for anybody out there, you have to listen to this. If you want to understand the inside scoop on the NBA on a daily basis, Woj brings that to you. But your last one was particularly very moving, Woj. It was with my favorite analyst of all time, Doris Burke. What were your biggest takeaways from that with her?
Yeah, I mean, just, I admire Doris as much as anybody I work with, I have worked with. She's a unique, special person and just a giving, great teammate. really happy for other people's successes, not an ounce of jealousy or pettiness in her. And she's rare. She's really rare in any walk of life. And so we had talked about, she had wanted to, sort of handle the rollout of sharing that information with people. And we had talked about doing it on the podcast and do it in relatively brief form. I think it was a 18 or 19-minute podcast. Usually we're probably double that in timing. But just, I think the most important thing to Doris was if she could help people in the audience to educate them, explain what she went through, and then explain the importance of social distancing, explain the importance of supporting people in our medical community right now who need a great deal of support. That was her motivation in doing this. I was, honored that we were able to do it together, and glad she's feeling better. She's past the symptoms. She had a pretty rough week with the symptoms coming, even as she was waiting to hear her diagnosis.
Well, no doubt. I mean, we at the Boardroom, we love Doris and send her our prayers and our thoughts and our well wishes. I'm going to call her after we get off the phone with you and I are doing. And Woj, I really appreciate you during this time. Just taking a moment to sit with us and to kind of bring it down to our fans, because I feel like so many things happen so fast. And look, I pay attention to this stuff all the time, but I have friends that are always asking a lot of questions. And it feels like in today's day and age, when we're all at home, we're very appreciative for the things that we have. And it's there are a lot of people out there sacrificing their lives to make sure that we're in this position. But I just appreciate you spending some time with us, man. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Great to be with you, Jay.